Hey you guys, Bryan Laesch here, back with another Let's Talk About Writing. This time I want to go over what's the deal with adverbs. What's the problem with adverbs? Why is everyone so anti-adverb? So if you've been online for a while and you've been looking for writing advice, one of the things that a lot of people tell you is to get rid of your adverbs. Generally speaking, the reason for this is because a lot of adverbs, specifically words that end in ly, is that if you use too many of them, it's kind of it's typically indicative of like pop fiction. It's a characteristic of pop fiction. One article I read online, they used an adverb in every sentence, which is kind of ridiculous because no one uses an adverb in every fucking sentence. So it did come off sounding, a little corny, a little cheap, I guess. Personally, I didn't notice anything that bad about it. But if you're not, but as I've said before, and as some other writers have said, there's always a time to break every rule. So let's take a look at a sentence that uses an adverb. She smiled mischievously. How did she smile? Mischievously. Mischievously is our adverb. Now, what's so wrong about having mischievously there? Personally, I don't see anything wrong with it. Although some writers would probably argue that the context of the situation should tell you how the girl smiled, how she smiled. Maybe if the situation was romantic, maybe if she just said something a little dirty or a little naughty, maybe it makes sense for her to have a mischievous smile. She said, what's a line of dialogue I could use here? I wouldn't mind seeing your bread rise, if you know what I mean. She smiled. So maybe, in that sense, a person might imagine a girl smiling and they go, oh, she had a mischievous smile, in their imagination. So you wouldn't need to put, she smiled mischievously. But, even if you took out mischievously, you could still say she had a mischievous smile. In this case, mischievous is now an adjective, not an adverb. And it basically has the same meaning. The sentence conveys the same meaning. So again, the context of the situation should, get rid of the adverb. The problem with this no adverb thing is that not all adverbs end in ly. For instance, in the sentence, she drove fast. How did she drive? She drove fast. Now, most writers would tell you that, that you shouldn't say she drove fast. You should say something like she sped, she accelerated, she careened. Something, some verb with a lot of action to it, with a lot of pop, to convey the meaning of the situation. Although, me being a smartass, I would try to argue semantics and say that there's a difference between driving fast and accelerating. There's a difference between driving fast and careening. There's a difference between driving fast and, what was the other word I used? Sped, I think I said. So, and again, if that is, you're not going to say she drove fast and then leave it at that. You're going to give some sort of context to the situation. You're going to describe how she was driving. She went so quickly that the rain on her windshield just seemed like one constant sheet of water. She drove so, she was driving so fast that she hydroplaned across a couple of puddles. So again, the context of the situation, everything before it, everything after it, everything around it, essentially, should get rid of the adverb itself. And you should use a more powerful verb than just drove. So then this begs the question: then is there any time you can use an adverb and have it not be and is there any acceptable time to have an adverb? And I was thinking real hard about this, and I came to the conclusion of the sentence, I arrived late. How did you arrive? I arrived late. Or when did I arrive? I arrived late. Because again, an adverb describes, a verb, describes a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. And it's like how you did something. And I think I think words describing time can be, are adverbs, like suddenly, or even like the phrase all of a sudden. I think that's technically an adverb. So I arrived late. Could you tell that same phrase, that same thought without the late? I don't know, it's kind of hard to say. Maybe if the context was, well, the invitation said 5 and I got there at 6. Therefore he arrived late or I arrived late, and there'd be no point in saying that I arrived late. But how many readers are going to pay attention to that, or how many readers are going to keep that in mind as they read? And you could describe a person arriving late. Oh, half the booze were gone, a bunch of the food was eaten, some of the party guests were drunk and stumbling around. Without giving the context of saying I arrived late, those things don't really make a whole lot of sense on their own. So sometimes there are times when using adverbs is fine. I think I've mentioned this before, but I looked up the reason of, should you get, if you're going to self-publish, should you spend the money to get a professional editor? And there was this guy who wrote a blog post, and he basically said, no, you don't need an editor as long as you keep your errors to a minimum. And he said, most readers care more about, they care about the story. Essentially, I don't think a lot of, as long as you don't abuse adverbs, I don't think anyone's going to really notice except for other writers. That begs the question, for whom are you writing? Are you writing this for a particular audience, a particular reader? Are you writing it for other writers? Why are you writing the book? Or for whom are you writing the book? And a lot of writing advice that I found on Pinterest lately says, not to imagine your audience as a whole bunch of readers, but rather to imagine it as that one single reader, that one person, that one individual. That's the person you're writing it for. You're writing for an audience of one. And to essentially keep that person in mind as you're writing. And when I think of that one individual person, I can't imagine that one individual person having an issue with me using adverbs occasionally. Another thing that goes around in the writing world is to only use he said, she said. Don't use as like a dialogue tag, he said, she said. Because again, the context should give away what sort, the way that person says something. You don't have to say he exclaimed. But then again, if you're ending the sentence with an exclamation mark, that makes sense. You don't need to say, he cursed. Shit, he cursed. No, you just say shit. Or you could say he cursed if you're trying to keep it clean. You don't have to say, Jim asked, where do I put my coat? No, you can just say, Jim said, where do I put my coat? Or, where do I put my coat? Or Jim took off his coat and said, where can I put this? Something like that. But there are times when there are some dialogue tags like responded or answered, or maybe not answered, but I would argue personally that to tell a writer not to use certain words or certain kinds of words in their writing would be extremely limiting. Writers are supposed to write, so wouldn't we want to use everything in our repertoire? Wouldn't we want to use everything available to us in order to craft a good story? Why should we limit ourselves? What's the point in that? Just so that we don't sound amateurish? Well, here's the big thing. What makes you sound more amateurish? Having a cliched tale that's been told 5,000 different times, or having a really well written story that is completely original and telling it in the way that it makes you sound like an amateur. Personally, I would think that the first one, that the former, is more amateurish than the latter. There are some good points on what's wrong with adverbs, and like every kind of word, or every word, every kind of word, every kind of phrase, every kind of cliche, they should not be overdone. But I wouldn't say get rid of them all entirely, because there are times when you're going to need them, and there are times when there won't be any way around it. So you're gonna have to use them. Okay, well, I'm Bryan Laesch, and I'll see you guys again next week.